My name is Tian Yu Shea. I'm a fourth-year medical student at the New York Institute of Technology, and you're listening to Do or Do Not. For our interview, we have Dr. Adena Leder, a board-certified neurologist with fellowship training in movement disorders. Dr. Leder graduated from NYIT College of Osteopathic Medicine in 1999 and completed her neurology residency at Long Island Jewish Medical Center and Montefiore Medical Center. She moved on to finish her movement disorder fellowship at Beth Israel Medical Center in 2004 and practiced clinical neurology for 10 years before joining NYITCOM. At NYIT, she is not only a professor, but hosts the RockSteady Boxing program, an alternative solution to slow the progression of Parkinson's disease. We hope you enjoyed this episode.
Adena, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, we're so excited. You are the first NYITCOM professor that we're having on the podcast. I think it's awesome. I'm really excited.
Thank you.
Okay, Adena. So usually when we start the podcast, we ask doctors to tell us what their day looked like. Now, you are a professor at NYITCOM and you have a clinical practice. So I'm sure your days vary a little bit, but can you tell us a little bit about, say, what your average day looks like starting when you get up in the morning?
So it depends on whether my day starts with my patients or if I start with a boxing day. If I have patients, then I sometimes have to wake up between 5 or 5:30. So I'll have time to do my workout before I get ready to go to work. And
Adena, I'm sorry to interrupt you. What kind of workout do you do at 5 o'clock in the morning?
I do a Peloton workout, so spin. I have to take my dog for a walk. I do a strength workout with arms. I started lower body recently, and I always do 10 minutes of core every single day.
All right. I just need a cup of coffee and stare at the wall for about an hour. So that's pretty impressive at 5 a.m. to me. So, all right. So you do workout and then let's say it's a patient day that you're doing. Tell me what that day might look like.
Pre-COVID, I would start at 9:00 and I actually get a half an hour for follow-ups and an hour for new patients with an hour for lunch. And this would keep going until about 5:00. And at 5:00, for the most part, I'm done seeing my patients. This is very much in contrast to when I used to work in private practice, and my clinical days started at 7:00 in the morning, and I had patients every 15 minutes without a moment for lunch, and I would go till 7:00 at night.
Okay, so definitely a little more laid back than when you were in clinical practice. And we're going to talk obviously about what type of doctor you are in your neurology practice. But can you tell us a little bit, are you seeing students or are you seeing neurology patients? Are you seeing movement disorders? And again, we're going to talk about your education and your residency, but can you tell us what kind of patients, and maybe an example of a patient that you saw today?
So generally, I am seeing Parkinson patients or patients with movement disorders or people that have concerns that they have Parkinson's or maybe newly diagnosed Parkinson's. Occasionally, I do still see general neurology patients, but I've become more focused on Parkinson patients in the last 5.5 years since I started working at the Parkinsons Center.
So can you also tell me, Adena, I know you're doing teaching at NYITCOM. So where do you fit that into your day? And I know you teach some osteopathic manipulation. Where do those type of things fit in?
I've always had at least 1 or 2 medical students with me, going into every single room with me and seeing patients with me. They would also come and help me in RockSteady, so they were able to see patients in different settings. Currently, my patients are now joining me on my telemedicine Zoom calls. So they're seeing patients like that. And on the days that I'm not doing clinical medicine, such as this morning, I didn't see patients. So I had I Zoomed with a student who's actually in Rochester right now. And I did about 2 hours of teaching just general neurology. And I do that at least 3 times a week with students that rotate with me.
That's awesome. That sounds like a good mix of education and clinical. And I know you mentioned RockSteady, and the students were really excited that we were going to have you on tonight, and they really wanted me to ask you about RockSteady. So this is a program, as I understand, that you brought to NYITCOM. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about, first of all, what the program is, second of all, how you got involved with the program, and third of all, what it means that you brought the program to NYITCOM?
Well, I first learned about what RockSteady was when I was in private practice. I had a gentleman who came to me who was one of the more disabled patients in my practice. He was practically blind. He walked with a rolling walker, and it's been very challenging to get people with Parkinson's disease to exercise. And they generally moan and complain, and they don't want to do anything. And this gentleman that I met mentioned to me that he was going to Brooklyn at least once a week because there was a fabulous boxing class there that he enjoyed taking. And I was so stunned to see that the man in this condition was doing this exercise and enjoyed it. And I realized at that point that this would be something that I needed to look into, because clearly it had a high compliance, which is what's the most difficult aspect of treating people with Parkinson's disease. So when I started working at NYITCOM, 60 Minutes featured Leslie Stahl's husband, and he was going to this exact program in Brooklyn, which was RockSteady, because Leslie Stahl's husband has Parkinson's.
Adena, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I'm like so out of touch. Who's Leslie Stahl?
Oh, I'm sorry. Leslie Stahl is one of the newscasters on 60 Minutes, and she did a whole program on her husband who was going to RockSteady. In any case, after 60 Minutes aired, we got 50 phone calls asking if we had the program at our center. And we realized that it was something that everyone in the community wanted. And so we learned about it. And it turns out that it's a program that was started in 2006 in Indianapolis, and all the other programs are affiliates. And in order to get a program at your site, you have to fly to Indianapolis, go to a boot camp, get trained so that you could go back and start the program at your site. And so that is what we embarked on here at NYITCOM.
So now, just as a generality, and this may sound like a stupid question or a silly question, but I mean, this sounds like something that AT still would want to do for Parkinson's patients if he was walking around NYITCOM now. Like, do you think that really fits with the osteopathic philosophy? Was that sort of the push to start the program at NYITCOM?
Well, it was my push, because when I at least went there, before I went there, I didn't realize the social component. I knew that it had all the protective effects, so I knew it from a physiologic standpoint, but it truly embraces the whole mind, body, spirit aspect of AT Still's teaching. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why I like it so much and why I think it's the perfect program to have at NYITCOM.
It's just a great story, and it sounds like it's very successful and everything's going really well. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk to you a little bit about when you decided, one of the questions that we always have for doctors is, when did you, or do you remember when you first decided that you wanted to become a doctor and became interested in medicine?
Right. So I didn't go to college wanting to be a doctor. I never thought I wanted to be a doctor. I went to Union College, which is a small liberal arts school. And I was a psychology major. And as part of my psychology major, I had to take a class called psychobiology. And in the middle of my sophomore year of psychobiology, I learned about dopamine as one of the neurotransmitters. And literally that day, I came home and said, I'm going to be a doctor. I didn't know how closely dopamine was going to be involved in my life. That came years later, but I started my journey already a little bit late. I already started. I didn't really get to start my pre-med classes until the summer of after my sophomore year in college.
Okay, so you decided you wanted to go to medical school. It was not out of the gates, and you started working towards that. Do you remember when you first heard about osteopathic school, or what specifically sort of led you to apply and how your application process was?
All of that is a little foggy given the fact that it was so many years ago. I just know that there was no internet, obviously. Everything had to be typed. There was a graduate, actually, that was a year ahead of me from Union, and he had gone to NYITCOM, which is what we called it back then. And since I took the year off and I was already very much into exercise and the whole like holistic aspect of things, I loved the idea of osteopathy back then, and that was how I applied. I just remembered that my earliest memory was that I got in early from that class, and so as a result, I was given a free microscope.
Yeah, I think we had one other person on the podcast who also felt blessed by that microscope, and that was sort of a very key part to his starting medical school. He was really excited about it.
Right, and it was very heavy to carry around.
Right. He was a big guy. He didn't mention that, but I'm sure it was heavy for him also. Adena, two questions. I guess one question is, did you apply to any allopathic schools or foreign schools?
I did not apply to foreign schools, and I did not look into allopathic schools. I applied to NYITCOM, and I remember applying to Biddeford in Maine, PCOM. I think those were, it was a big process, I believe, at the time.
Yeah, like you said, pre-internet,
Right.
there was a lot of paper.
Exactly.
Right. So you took a year in between. So before you started at NYITCOM, you did, I guess, a lot of people call it a gap year. What did you do during that year?
Well, I wanted to travel, so I actually got a job working for a teen tour company initially in the summer right after I finished college. So I traveled across the country, drove a U-Haul truck, and I camped for 6 weeks, and I was paid to do it. And then I got a bunch of different interesting temp jobs. So I was able to save up more money so I could go and backpack through Europe the following summer before I started at NYITCOM.
I feel like, a lot of people take gap years and sometimes they really feel that it adds to them as a person and gives them some extra experience. Do you actually look back fondly on that year that you took between college and medical school?
The traveling parts were amazing. It definitely helped my growth, and it helped me know what I didn't want to be doing. So I guess in that respect, it was helpful.
Can you tell our listeners, if you remember, now I know this is going back a bit, but what are your memories of medical school? What did you think about medical school at NYITCOM, and did you meet?
No, we met great. There were great people there. I think overall I had a very good experience overall. My first 2 years there where we were on campus were fine, and no, I had a good anatomy group. I had a good group of people that I bonded with, and it was overall I had a pretty positive experience.
And did you do any special extracurricular activities, or did you really focus on your studies while you were there?
The only thing aside from my studies was that I went to the gym every day after lectures.
Okay, so a little similar to what you're doing now, except you shifted now to the morning, right? So you're always
Right,
working.
exactly.
Right.
I don't have time after work to exercise. So I was always at the lectures. I never had anyone take notes for me. I was one of those sitters that was there every day taking notes. And at the end of every day, the first thing I did before I studied was that I went to the gym. And that was
Okay.
about it.
So you were studying and working out, and that was your day.
That was it.
Okay. And did you do any research while you were in medical school?
Nope. I
Okay.
did not do any research. I didn't know it was an option.
Now, when you sat for exams, did you take the USMLE or did you only take the COMLEX?
I don't even think it was called COMLEX. And if we were back there, I was the NBOME, and I never took the USMLE.
Okay, so you took the NBOME. When did you decide on your specialty, and how did you decide that you wanted to pursue a career in neurology?
So that's a good question. We went through every rotation third year, and I tried to really keep an open mind. And each rotation, I realized they just were not for me. And once I had an opportunity to do neurology, it kind of brought me back to where I was in college, and I had that interest back then. Within the first week of my neurology rotation, I was actually rotating at Maimonides. I was sold.
I don't know if you can answer this question, but I remember on a specific interview that we had with a neurosurgeon, and a few other people mentioned this. They said in medical school, there are people that decide that they want to do surgery, and then there are people that decide they want to do medicine. So that's a little broad, and it kind of leaves out neurology. So do you think neurology has its own separate category and should be added as a third option, or would you put it into one of those categories?
Well, it's definitely non-surgical. I think it has its own category because neurologists are definitely a species of their own.
And what do you think makes a neurologist or someone interested in neurology special or different from, say, someone that's interested in medicine? Like, what are the interests and the thought process that make it a little different?
I just think neurologists are, as a whole, I mean, I'm used to them, but we're all a little bit more quirky than just people who go into medicine. There's something that's like different and quirky about us.
I don't know. I think maybe I'd argue that a couple of the internists I know are a little quirky, but I think I understand what you're saying. So tell me a little bit about your application process to residency and how you chose your residency program, and specifically if you think your application process was a little more difficult as a DO.
So I don't remember much except the total number of residencies that I applied to, I believe were 5, which is compared to today, people tell me that they apply to 100. I literally, and I don't remember exactly how we did it, but I interviewed at all the places and I ranked LIJ as my top choice and I matched there. And there were no osteopathic options for doing a neurology residency, which was unfortunate. The closest was Michigan, and my family situation at the time didn't allow me to go to Michigan. So I was very happy to have matched it Long Island Jewish.
Did they have DOs in the program before you? And were there other DOs in the program at the time that you were there?
It was a mix, but yes, there had been DOs, and our chairman already was very familiar with NYITCOM and really liked our residents a lot. So it was not an issue at all as a DO and interviewing. Obviously, my predecessors had done a good job prior to my getting there.
Now, Long Island Jewish, I know well, is sort of, I would say it's sort of a larger institution and a little more of a public sort of inner city patient population. What do you think of the pros and cons of picking that type of institution as opposed to, say, a more private place and maybe someplace a little smaller?
Well, first of all, my program was related to Einstein, and so I spent 6 months at Montefiore. So compared to Montefiore, it was actually very much like a private hospital, and it didn't seem inner city at all compared to Montefiore, which is also happens to be a private hospital. But I definitely think that you see more pathology, you see a more diverse mix of people, you definitely have a higher patient load. And I saw even more of that when I was up in the Bronx.
So if you had to give advice to someone comparing, say, Long Island Jewish as a more private hospital to the Bronx, the population in the Bronx, do you think that one of them is better? If someone didn't have that opportunity to have both of those experiences, would you recommend one over the other? Or would you actually say that trying to find a place that has both would be the best place to train?
It really depends on each person's personal situation, and you have to weigh all of the options. And if you have an opportunity to see more patients, more pathology, of course, that would be terrific. Unfortunately, sometimes in those situations, you might also have to sacrifice teaching. Because I was at Einstein, I feel that I had great teaching when I was in the Bronx as well, but you have to look into all of those aspects of the program because you want to have a good balance of the pathology that you're exposed to and the teaching that you're receiving.
Okay, Dina, that's great advice. So you decided to do a subspecialty, a fellowship after neurology. What made you decide to do that?
Well, I didn't have any doctors in my family and I had no one to advise me. And one of the residents that I worked with came from a family of doctors. And she basically said to me, you need to do a fellowship. And so I basically decided to pick a fellowship where I felt the most uncomfortable, and that was in movement disorders. I really didn't feel comfortable taking care of Parkinson's patients. I could never make heads or tails of all the different medications they were on. And so I thought it would be a good idea to do a fellowship in movement disorders.
Now, obviously, looking back, that was an extra year and it took extra time. And of course, it gave you a little extra expertise, which, as we talked about earlier in this discussion, it really is what your practice is about now. Looking back, would you have still done that specialty? Would you recommend to a neurology resident today that exactly the advice that you were given, that they should do a subspecialty, that they should do a fellowship after the residency?
I think it gives you a lot more flexibility, especially as a woman. If you have an extra training, you can't go wrong with extra training, although it's sacrificing a year of your life, of course, where you're not making as much money as you could if you're in practice already. But you have to do what you love. You have to really know what you're getting into and what you like.
So you decide you like movement disorders. You feel the most. That's the thing that you feel most uncomfortable with, and hopefully when you finished with that, you feel the most comfortable with that, and now you're looking for a job, right? So can you tell our listeners a little bit about what that experience was like when you started looking for a job, how you chose the job that you chose, and sort of how your career was? Again, obviously now you're in academics, but how it was in private practice, and then ultimately what made you decide to leave private practice for academics?
Well, once I was doing the specialty, because I was already from the area and trained at LIJ, many of the local attendings knew of me and they knew what I was doing. And so it really wasn't very hard for me to find a job. Instead, people were coming to me asking if I wanted to join their practice. So that was a very easy aspect of all of this. The nice part was that I had just had a baby, and the practice that I worked for had an opportunity for me to work there 2 days a week. And so I grabbed it because as a new mother, you had to have a private practice job where you're seeing patients 2 days a week. That's without call though, but in the office was a very nice opportunity.
So obviously, I can't even imagine. I can barely wake up in the morning. I don't go to the gym. I go to work and do my thing. If I had to raise kids at the same time, thankfully, my wife kind of takes care of all that. But you had to take care of your family and raise the kids. So working 2 days a week made a huge difference. And how many years did you do that for?
I never only worked 2 days a week because I was on call at least every 4 to 6 weeks, where I had to round at least 3 hospitals starting for the
Wow.
first year, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And after the first or second year, myself and one of the other colleagues decided that we were tired of going to a non-teaching hospital where we could get called at 3 a.m. to go in and do lumbar punctures. So we whittled it down to 2 hospitals. And then for the remaining 8 years, every 4 to 6 weeks, I was rounding at, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, where I could go back multiple times to both hospitals, then plus the 2 days. But eventually I added another day or more. And then I was ultimately doing that for 10 years.
Wow. To me, that really sounds like that's not part-time. That's like 2 full-time jobs. So you are doing this, neurology with call at the hospital plus clinic hours plus taking care of the family.
Right. So I would have to go and see patients in the hospital early in the morning before the babies woke up, or late at night after I put them to sleep. That's when I would have to round on my patients.
That's amazing. And just, your husband, I know, is a doctor also. So was he helping out with this? Is he
would help. He would help, but sometimes he had to be seeing patients also. So that didn't make things easy. So we would have to work around one another's schedules, and sometimes it was real challenging.
Yeah, again, that sounds like 16 jobs, the equivalent of 16 jobs. So you did this for 10 years. And did you just say at some point, this is not what I want to do? Or, how did you decide that you wanted to go into academics?
Well, someone from NYITCOM called me actually about a year before I decided to change because they were doing research and they wanted me to be a PI on their project. And I decided I would go over there to meet them to find out who it was that was reaching out to me. And while I was there, I said, well, this is a Parkinson's center. This would be really a neat thing if I was able to be here. And I started kind of talking to people and thinking about it and realizing that, this would probably be a nice switch for me. And I was getting a bit burnt out with the combination of the hours and the hospital call and the nights and getting called 2:00 in the morning on many, many nights. And I think I was just realizing it was time for a change.
So you ended up going to New York Tech. And I guess, going back to the beginning of our discussion, the rest is sort of history. And I know that any student I've ever spoken to just absolutely loves to work with you and thinks you're a huge asset, their medical education, which is amazing.
Thank you.
If you had to go back and choose a different specialty, is there anything else that you think you may have liked? Like maybe something you did in medical school. You said, listen, if I didn't do neurology, I think I would have done this and been happy.
No, I wouldn't have been able to do anything else.
Okay. So neurology or bust, no question. It was neurology.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Quirky and good.
No question. Yes, absolutely.
Next question, again, a little bit personal, but we always ask people that we have on the podcast about medical school loans. Did you take any loans, and did finance in any way affect your choice of your medical specialty?
So I'm not sure if anybody remembers, but when I was there, they were subsidized loans. And so I did take loans, but they didn't have any interest. It wasn't as difficult to pay them off. Yeah.
You don't sound stressed about the loans. So the
No.
loans, they didn't stress you out. You're like, look, this is the cost of medical school. And as far as residency goes, were you looking at salaries of specialties, or you just like, look, I love neurology. And this
so
is what
LIJ actually had one of the higher salaries for residents compared to other similar residencies. So it was decent. Everything worked out at that point financially. That was okay.
So your husband is an internist. Has he always been supportive of your career? And was it difficult, do you think, in those 10 years where, you were having this crazy call at the hospital and maybe he was on call also? Do you think it's really stressful and difficult to have a 2-doctor family? Or do you think it's just great that you have 2 physician salaries and it actually makes everything easier?
So I'd say a little bit of both. There's always 100% supportive. There was never an issue with that. It's always when you throw children into the mix that's where the stress comes on. It's great to have somebody that understands everything that you're going through, that's supportive. But once you have to manage childcare and things like that, it's a stress that's coming from outside. Otherwise, I think it's doable. If you have the right partner, I don't think that it makes things more stressful.
So what are your thoughts? I know we touched a little bit on the fact that you teach some OMM. So what were your thoughts on OMM when you were at NYITCOM as a student? And what were your thoughts? Do you use any OMM in your practice of neurology? And how do you feel about OMM as a teacher?
So I think as a student, I was skeptical because of the way we were taught at the time. When I was a resident, I was in an allopathic residency. And so unfortunately, it wasn't something that was taught during residency. When I was in private practice, another DO joined our group, and we decided that maybe we would start trying to offer osteopathic manipulation. And at the time, the person that we worked for did not want it done in their practice. And so now I teach first years. I think it's the one thing that is missing, because here we've been out how long? 20 years or so. And there have been so many drug recalls that really feel that the one thing that you can't hurt somebody with is using OMM. I'm a huge proponent of it. And I think my biggest regret was that I didn't have as much early on, and I wish that I had pursued it more. And so now that's my biggest wish, is to tell people to practice it more, and because people want it. And now there's a wait for people to get in with the doctors that have been practicing it all these years. I only wish that I had more hands-on practice in OMM over the years.
So that's great advice. You really feel that, specifically for the DO students that are listening, you think they should take better advantage of the osteopathic manipulative classes, although it may not always seem as pertinent as they're going through school.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it is such an important part of it. It's in part what distinguishes us, and it gives us an extra toolbox. I've seen patients with concussion become healed by cranial manipulation. And for a neurologist to be able to do cranial is amazing, but you really need a lot of hands-on time to master cranial. And based on what I've explained to you of my life over the years, unfortunately, I didn't have that extra time to really master cranial, but I wish I had.
We're building a website and trying to get the Do or Do Not website with a lot of different links. And one of the things that we came across on the internet is a campaign that came out from the AOA called Doctors That Do. And you are sort of the poster child for Doctors That Do. Like your face is sort of the face of the campaign. Can you tell us a little bit about that campaign and how you got involved with it and what you think the importance of that campaign is?
So in 2017, the AOA sent out an email to a whole bunch of DOs and said that they were running this ad campaign. And do you know anyone that really lives the osteopathic life and is doing something different? And I was nominated for this campaign, and out of over 200 people that were nominated, they picked 4 people, and I was one of them. And basically, because of the RockSteady program, they decided to use me in their campaign. And I was flown out to the AOA headquarters in Chicago for a photo shoot day. And so those are the pictures that you see there.
The campaign is great. I think the campaign really highlights osteopathy and people like you who are really at the forefront of medicine in general and really represent the profession to its utmost. So I think you should be really proud of yourself for being chosen for that.
Thank you.
All right, Adena. So my last question, sort of a grand finale question. Do you have one piece of advice? Now, this advice, just to be clear, this advice is not from you. So do you have one piece of advice that you were given throughout your education, from your parents or from a college teacher, someone at medical school or someone at residency, or just someone else that was close to you that really is important to you and that you think would be worthy of passing on to other students, or that you do pass on to other students?
So the best piece of advice is to do what you love, because if you end up doing what you love, it doesn't feel like a job. It feels like a hobby. And at this point in my career, I feel like I'm just enjoying a hobby every day rather than enduring a job.
All right, Adena, I have to say, waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning and working out, and then doing a boxing class with movement disorder patients, teaching and seeing clinical patients sounds like a lot to me, but the fact that you enjoy that as a hobby is amazing. And I just want to say, from all of the students that recommended that we interview you and have you on the podcast, that they think you're doing a great job. I think you're doing a great job, and that New York Tech is lucky to have you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
This concludes our episode of Do or Do Not. Send all inquiries, comments, suggestions, and even let us know if there's someone you want us to interview to doordonotpodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to like us on Facebook at Do or Do Not Podcast for updates. If you enjoyed our podcast, please share it with your classmates and administration. We have plenty of more interviews lined up, and we're excited to share them with you. This is Tian Yu Shea. Thank you guys so much for listening to Do or Do Not.